morning. Thank you everyone for being here. It's great to be back at the Drucker Forum. I'm really excited about this year's theme in particular. I think it could not be more timely or more relevant. At the same time, growth and inclusive prosperity are challenges that have eluded us for a long time. And what do you do when you're stuck on a problem? Well, you try to ask a new question or reframe a new insight. And that is what our panelists are going to be helping us with this morning. I am delighted to be joined by three excellent experts on this topic. First, to my left and kicking us off will be Thomas Wedell-Wettelsborg, who is the author of the recent HBR article, Are You Solving the Right Problems? And co-author of the book, Innovation as Usual. And then to his left is Hal Gregersen, who is the executive director of the MIT Leadership Center and author of The Innovator's DNA. And then down at the end, our closer today will be Roger Martin, who probably needs no introduction to most of you, but his new book is Creating Great Choices with Jennifer Reel, and it's a very timely topic and very relevant to this panel today as well. So as we get going, I just want you to keep in mind the following words from, of course, Peter Drucker, which is that the most serious mistakes are not being made as a result of wrong answers. The true dangerous thing is asking the wrong question. So now for our brief masterclass in asking better questions. Thomas, thank you.
Thank you. So what Sarah, of course, forgot to mention in the introduction, or rather I didn't ask her to mention, was that before I entered my academic phase, I spent about 4 years in the infantry. And I mentioned that, of course, to impress you. The problem is only this was, in fact, the Danish army I spent time in. And to be honest, mostly what we did was to run around and practice saying we surrender in different languages. Maybe, yeah. I am here today because I am on a mission to upgrade the world's ability to solve problems. And to that end, I want to talk for a little bit about this concept that's called reframing the problem. You are probably familiar with this already. You all, I guess, know this particular quote. Who is the gentleman who came up with that? Well, Albert Einstein, or at least that's attributed to him. We have known for more than 100 years that our ability to diagnose problems correctly is a crucial success factor. And yet, today, 85% of companies say that we struggle with it. This is a survey I did 2 years ago of 106 C-suite characters from 17 different countries, and the message was clear. We tend to waste a lot of time and money barking up the wrong trees, solving the wrong problems. The interesting thing with this concept is, we've understood it for a long time, and it is easy to understand, but it is actually difficult to do. So to that end, instead of opening with a traditional talk, I have instead decided to try to take us through a brief example of it. That is, in my mind, one of the easiest ways to remember what this concept is really about. And that example is called the slow elevator problem. Now, the slow elevator problem, I'll explain what that is in a second. And then I'll ask for your help in trying to reframe the problem itself. And what that means is, don't try to solve it, try to come up with a different way of understanding the problem itself. So, here it is. You happen to own an office building, and the tenants in this building, well, they're complaining a lot about the elevators, that they're slow, they have to wait, it's annoying. And now they have come to you and said, if you don't fix this problem with the elevator, we are going to leave. We are going to break our leases and move out of here, which would be a problem for you. What you will notice here, like with problems in the real world, it's not coming to us neutrally. Somebody has already framed the problem for us. They come to us and said, the problem is that the lift is slow. And if we get trapped in that framing, we start brainstorming on, okay, how do we make it faster? Can we upgrade the algorithm? Do we put in a stronger motor? Do we have to go out and buy a new lift? What I invite you to do is to go in and spend even just 30 seconds trying, instead of trying to solve it, trying to go in and thinking of different ways with which to view the problem, and not how can you look at this in a different way. So what I'll ask you to do now to warm us up a little bit in the morning is in the next about 30 seconds, I'll ask you to do two things. First, I'll ask you to say hello to one other person sitting near you, ideally somebody you have not met before. That's the first 10 seconds. And then you jointly have the remaining 20 seconds to try to come up with at least 3 different ways to see this problem. At least 3 ways to rethink what the problem here is actually about. Ladies and gentlemen, please take 30 seconds, find one other person, say hello, and come up with 3 different framings. All right, that was a quick round of trying to reframe the slow elevator problem. I hope you said hello to somebody new as well. What I will invite you to do, we never should have started them talking. Oh my God, let's never do this again. Hello! Thank you for your eager participation. We're very glad to see you are this awake at this horribly early time of the morning, in my view at least. What you may have arrived at here is hopefully a few examples of looking at this problem differently. What I'll do here is I'll share some examples here, and you can, for yourselves, you can kind of keep count of how many you got right, or if you got some other perspectives as well. You might say, instead of thinking of this as a problem with the speed of the elevator, you can say, well, the issue is around the stairs, that they're not taking them. It might be that the weight itself is boring. It might be, of course, that the tenants are idiots. Popular one. It might be that the lift looks old. This is a perception problem. It might be that it's peak demand, everybody goes to lunch at 12 o'clock, and that's when it happens. It might be that people run late for meetings. That's the real issue. It might be the floor allocation. We have a sales force up on the top floor, very inconvenient. It might be a negotiation tactic. They want to lower the rent, and so on. I share this example because it highlights, in a very simple, memorable way, it highlights the core idea of what reframing is about. Namely, to go in, to very rapidly say, what is the problem we're trying to solve? And then to go in and spend even a few minutes on the question, is there a different way to look at the problem itself? And admittedly, a lot of the problems we're facing are tougher than a slow elevator. But I show this also to highlight 3 core ideas that I want to share with you here around how reframing works and how it might be different from the way we normally do problem diagnosis. So, first of all, I want you to notice the speed of this process. What people tend to do sometimes when we talk about diagnosing problems, they tend to spend a ton of time and analyzing the problem, and then, oh, now we have the perfect diagnosis, now we act. That is a bad way to use reframing. This gets you caught in paralysis by analysis. A better way to think of reframing is to use it iteratively. So switching between reframing practice very rapidly, and then going out and trying conversation, experimentation, observation, and so on, and then going back and saying, what did we learn that'll help us rethink the nature of the problem itself? The notion here is that reframing, if you will, can be considered a cognitive counterpoint to rapid prototyping. It is a skill that augments and balances the need to go out into the world and experience what's going on there. The second insight I want to share with you revolves around this notion that I like to call it breaking the frame. You're familiar, I take it, with methodologies like 5 whys, root cause analysis, maybe Ishikawa diagrams, and so on. We've had those tools for a long time. They are tremendously helpful, but there's also a specific observation I've made in terms of how we use them to rethink problems that can sometimes trap us. because there are two different ways of thinking about how we reframe a problem. If you have a problem, well, the first way is to go in and try to analyze the details of the problem, looking at the very specific elements of it. That might be asking questions like, why is the elevator slow? And understanding the causal system behind that. What I'm encouraging here is the notion of breaking outside of the first framing, of asking questions like, is the elevator actually slow? Is there something completely different going on? Is this the problem really that our contracts allow people to leave easily, or whatever it is? This notion of breaking the frame is, in my view, the missing link in a lot of the work we've already done on problem diagnosis. The final insight is basically around, it's almost a philosophical level. We talk a lot about what's the real problem. Well, that is a dangerous way to think about problems, because problems, especially complex problems, tend not to be unicausal, they tend to be multi-causal. The idea here with reframing is not to go in and say, what is the real problem, as if everything else were just symptoms. The point here of the method is to go in and say, is there a better problem to solve than the one we're currently looking at? Linking that to the elevator example, well, I don't know if you are familiar with it. It's, of course, an old one. The classic thing that a lot of building facilities managers try before they go out and buy a new lift, that's a much simpler thing. Namely, they put up a mirror in the hallway. And what they do that because what happens is that people go, oh, I'm busy, oh, that's beautiful. And they forget time. The mirror is not the point. The mirror is just a memorable example of the fact that sometimes we can find non-obvious solutions by going out and reframing the problem. And that's what I hope we'll be doing today and tomorrow as well on the problems we're looking at. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Thomas, thank you very much for that. I will never look at an elevator mirror quite the same way again. Hal, I know you've been working a lot on asking better questions, so help us.
Thank you. I'm going to start with a comment that I believe, honestly, growth and inclusive prosperity is driven by growing and inclusive leaders. And growing and inclusive leaders are the ones who ask catalytic questions. And by catalytic, I mean these are questions that challenge the deepest, most fundamental assumptions we hold about our organizations, about ourselves, perhaps our countries, perhaps the world. These are the questions that are the toughest ones to ask in any organization. These are the ones that often get unasked. And for the past 5 years, I've been interviewing about 200 leaders who I would describe as pretty exceptional at being growing and inclusive and asking and evoking difficult questions from other people. So we all know that asking the right questions matter. We wouldn't be here at the Drucker Forum. He was the master of asking the right questions. And we all can kind of nod our head that, yeah, it's important to ask the right questions. But my question to you is, if I worked with you and I came to you and said, how could you help me ask the right question? How can I get better at it? What's your answer? Here's the answer I got from those 200 people. Put yourself in situations that force or cause you to ask the right questions. It's behavioral. So let me give you a quick example and then some situations to consider. I had a chance to visit with Walt Bettinger, the CEO of Charles Schwab, and he said, isolation is the #1 challenge in my role as the CEO. People start telling me what they think I want to hear, and they stop telling me what they think I don't want to hear. Ed Catmull, the president of Disney and Pixar Animation Studios, said it's a dangerous disconnect. Isolation is the #1 enemy of innovation, and isolation is the #1 enemy of asking the right questions. And I'm not just talking about social media isolation. I'm talking about behavioral isolation, how we spend our days. So let me ask you a few diagnostic questions about how big your or my bubble might be that's protecting me from the questions that I might need to be asking to take our organization or country into a different place. First question. How many barriers are between you and other people that they have to jump through or crash through to get to you, to have a direct conversation with you? I find it deeply instructive to wander around the halls of the World Economic Forum Davos meetings and see which leaders are alone and which leaders have a coterie of 10 to 12 people protecting them from information that might be dangerous. Zero barriers are how these leaders get information that otherwise they wouldn't get, that allow them to ask questions other people don't ask. Second question. These leaders were, the comment in the question is, these leaders were seeking out situations where they were uncomfortably wrong. So when was the last time you were dead wrong about something? Hasso Plattner, one of the founders of SAP, said every morning he wakes up wondering how many things he's dead wrong about. He's on the hunt when he wanders around the world to not confirm what he believes, but to disconfirm, to uncover things that would be stunningly and surprisingly wrong in his world so that he can right them. Second question. When was the last time someone asked you an uncomfortable question? How many had it happen within the last week? How many are feeling it right now? If they're not asking you or me as the leader the uncomfortable question, who are they asking? If they keep the question inside of their head that's challenging fundamental assumptions in the organization, they're going to go crazy because we never worry alone, it's just toxic. If they're talking to other people in the organization but not us, we're going to get blindsided. And heaven forbid if they go outside of the organization with the question they should have asked inside of the organization, that's the worst of all worlds. Are we creating a safe enough place for other people to come to us with the questions that count? The ones that cause us to be very uncomfortable in our seats. Final question is, when we ask those questions or when we ask questions, how long do we wait in silence for other people to answer those questions? 1001, 1002, 1003, 1004. If we're not waiting at least 3 seconds, we're likely asking questions that we already have the answers to, or they already do as well. I don't know what the data are outside of the United States, but inside of the United States, the average child between the age of 6 and through college at 21, sitting in a classroom for 1 hour for an entire month, asks one question of substance during the day, an entire month. The average teacher asks 100 questions an hour. The average wait time is 1 second, and if you don't get the first question, I'll give you another question related to it, and you get a half a second on the second question. You get where I'm going. These leaders are exceptional at putting themselves in situations where they are wrong, uncomfortable, and quiet, and that is the means by which they ask questions other people don't ask. I'm going to finish with a quick story about Walt Bettinger I started with. Where did he learn how to consistently put himself on the edge? In fact, if you were talking to Walt, he might say to you, "My biggest challenge is isolation. Can you please help me?" He has his direct reports give him reports about the bad news in the system regularly. And he learned that because he was dead wrong quite some time ago when he was in college. He was going through a 4-year college program. He had an ambition to finish it in 3 years and get straight A's. He was on his final semester, his final class, his final. He and the other students walked into the room. It had a single page, blank sheet of paper on the table for each student. The professor came to the front of class and said, "I have taught you everything I possibly can about finance and economics, and I believe you know it. Now I'm going to ask you a question that's more important. Turn over the paper." They turned the paper over. It was still blank. And then he said to them, You have been in this building for 3 or 4 years. You have studied in this building. You've taken classes in this building. Some of you have slept in this building. You've lived here. Here's the question. And if you don't have the answer to this single question, he said, you will fail this exam. For Walt, that would mean his only B. This was the question. What is the name of the woman who cleans this building? Walt didn't know. Walt failed the exam. He learned his lesson. What did Walt do the next day? He met Dottie, the woman who cleaned the building. Asking the right questions comes from being in the right place. And the right place is not in our office, it is not in our headquarters, it is outside in the world, on the edges, where people are confronting us in ways that we're wrong and comfortable and quiet. And when that happens, the doors fling wide open for growth and inclusive prosperity to become real and not simply a motto. Thank you.
Thank you, Hal. Roger.
Well, thank you, Thomas. Thank you, Hal. And I'm going to try and pick up on the thoughts Thomas started us off on problem reframing, and Hal's on the isolation point that you made. So I think it feels to many of us that the world has gotten rather polarized. There are lots of sort of polarizing issues out there. Should we do soft Brexit or hard Brexit? Should we retreat from globalization? Should we embrace globalization? In America, should we repeal and replace Obamacare or fix it? One thing after another, which seem to be relatively intractable feeling, polarized problems. And I would argue that the polarization feeling comes from a cause. It's a symptom to me of a cause, and the cause is certitude. We have an increasing sense of certitude out in the world, and it is very hard to get anywhere on a problem when you've got certitude. And what helps you with certitude? Isolation helps you believe that your view is the only one that really matters. And the problem, the misframed problem, is since I'm correct, and I'm certain I'm correct, then the challenge at hand is to attempt to crush the other model, make it go away, so that I don't have to do this horrible thing, which is to compromise. Now, that sounds good, except that the other side is at the very same time thinking, my problem is I've got the right answer, I'm certain of that, and I must crush the other answer. And so we have this experience of polarization. And we fret about it and worry about it and just keep in the spin cycle of feeling that we've got polarization. To me, and the work that I've done over many years now, and with the help of my colleague Jennifer Rial, is to ask the question, is there a better way than to do that? And I think there is. And what we found in our work is that if, instead of believing that you see the truth, even though it feels good, feels kind of handy, if you see the truth, instead, if you say, I have a model of the world. And the cool thing about models is they help us understand the world. So they are really helpful. The downside of models is, as the great John Sterman at MIT says, all models, probably your friend at MIT, says all models are what? Wrong. Every model is wrong, otherwise it wouldn't be a model. It would be reality, and then it would be too complicated to do anything with it. Right? So there's this dilemma about models. Models are all wrong because they're simplifications, but hopefully they can be helpful. But if, instead of saying, I am certain that I'm right, I'm absolutely certain that I am right, because I'm staring at reality, you say, I'm modeling. Right? You make that tiny little step, which is, I'm modeling the world, and my model is incomplete. And if somebody else has got a model that seems very contrary to mine, I need to reframe the problem as saying, is there a way to build a new model that contains elements of each model, but is superior to both? Note, not a compromise. Not a compromise. That the goal is to take the two models and do something better with them. Our experience is if you do that reframe and explore the models, as we say, fall in love with the two models, which is always hard. It's always hard to fall in love with the other model. You want to fall in love with your own, not the other one. But if you fall in love with both models, there are always, not sometimes, not most of the times, there are actually always better answers. And there's a big healthcare debate in the US now. Half a century ago, there was a similar healthcare debate in Canada. There were people who said, we should keep with this private system that we currently have now, otherwise it'll be all terribly stultified, etc. And we don't want to do the thing that England has done, which is to have the National Health Services where it's government employees and bureaucrats delivering health care. The people on the other side said we need to have national health care so that the poor and disadvantaged are covered. That's the nature of a wonderful, caring nation, is that everybody gets health care, right? We had those two sides. They were extremely polarized. One side thinking, this is government takeover, this is horrible. The other side saying, these people who care about a private sector healthcare system are uncaring and unfeeling. So you've got that as the situation. What happened is some very clever people, rather than saying, I'll just dig into my position, started asking the question, how could we get the best of both? No compromise, how could we get the best of both? And the answer was a system that has now been copied many places, which is doctors are private, they deliver healthcare privately. There's a single payer, right? Which is the government, provincial governments. Everybody is covered. Every last person is covered, and the governments reimburse the doctors on a particular fee schedule. So a single payer model that is privately delivered. Now, I'm Canadian by birth, and maybe I feel too good about the healthcare system. It sure is nice to just go in with an OHIP card and get service with no muss, no fuss, and it's nice to know that all other Canadians get similar treatment regardless of their situation. And so maybe I'm too high on it, but what I would argue is that's the way you can solve problems which seem polarizing and seem like an either or. And every problem out there could be solved this way if we just do that. But you have to reframe in the way Thomas has said and not isolate yourself within one single model to do it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, gentlemen. So I'd like to keep on, Roger, what you were saying about not compromising, but going for an integrative thinking approach by picking up on an example that I think, I'm not going to go into politics, we're going to leave that for other folks, but an example we've been kind of stuck on in the States is vaccinations. And that's one where you have a bunch of people on each side who are certain that they are right, some that vaccines are bad and cause autism, and some that vaccines are good and, prevent things like polio and smallpox. And there is one side that is actually scientifically right, and like, how would you sort of break that deadlock? Because in that case, it seems like certitude on one side would be okay.
That's an interesting case, and it's a case that my colleague Jennifer and I have actually worked on with doctors, which is to say, how much does it help for the medical scientific community to be right when vaccination rates are falling? So what has rightness got them? The answer is nothing. We had higher vaccination rates 10 years ago than we have today in America and in a number of other countries. And so what the exercises we do when we work with doctors on this one is to get them past the certitude question to say, what is it about the anti-vax movement and their models that we better darn well understand to have the product, which again, this is a Thomas point, the framing should be the product is not somebody wins and somebody loses. We crush those anti-vax people. It's the answer, the product we're searching for is a way to help people understand the world that they face in a better way, all right? And the more we just say the anti-vax people are idiots, you know, they're evil, stupid or evil, right? They're clueless and they're damaging their children and damaging herd immunity. As long as we're saying that, we're isolated. We're isolated in the realm of our own model, and nothing good will happen. It's one of the toughest things we've ever done because the medical scientific folks would like to stay in their little bubble of the science is clear and the problem is idiots. No, the science may be clear, but the way you've helped to distribute that scientific knowledge has caused a whole bunch of people to say, I hate you, and I'm going to do my own thing, because you're not respecting the parents' right to choose for their kids. And I think there's been better momentum on the basis of that.
Yeah. Hal, yes, go. Yeah.
What would be interesting to me, Roger, is if those physicians, for example, were to spend a day with a family that is the idiot family.
Yes.
And try to get to the point where they can not only hear the words coming out of their mouths, but see the emotion behind the words in those eyes, to the point that somehow they come away with a different way of looking at it.
Yeah.
I mean, there is, and that's the point of what I'm trying to say, is that if we're trying to break that standoff between two polar positions, the only way, from my research, would suggest getting through that is actually getting so embedded in the other world that I can truly comprehend, respect, perhaps not agree with, but feel where they're coming from.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think it's the best method, because what we say is necessary to come up with an integrative solution rather than a compromise is to fall in love with the other model. We say, and we use that terminology because we love it, because when you fall in love with someone, you can't imagine anything bad about them and nothing else matters. And that's what you have to get to in the other model, and how your intervention would be exactly that. Because if they went to the vast majority of the anti-vax families, they'd find they love their kids dearly. They think they're protecting them the most by doing this. They aren't stupid and they aren't evil. And then you'd get some clues as to say, well, what's a world in which people would feel very comfortable with the kind of a vaccination approach. And it might be that they have more choice in it, but they're more educated about the nature of the choices, for example, rather than feeling that the government is forcing something down their throats against the potential interests of their children.
Which I guess what I'm thinking, we have 8 grandkids, and I'm thinking, in your spirit, we don't fall in love online.
Yeah.
We fall in love face to face.
Yeah. So that's interesting, because we've had kind of a couple of themes already today that have come up. Sort of, we need face-to-face time. We need to get outside our bubbles. We need to be uncomfortable, quiet, and wrong. This is all, I think, stuff that leaders today are not necessarily rewarded for doing. We kind of want people to stand up and be loud and be certain, and we kind of feel more comfortable following those kinds of people. So I guess I'm just wondering, is there a kind of leadership model realistically that you could see that would prioritize this kind of more humble, consensus building, integrative thinking?
a quick reflection on that. That's a very tough problem to solve on a broad scale, on the macro level. I don't know how we change the dynamics of, say, expert opinion to get away from the whole kind of super certainty that tends to work well with audiences. What I would say is, when I've seen it happen, it's been in local units. So the question is perhaps not how do we change our entire society to, be more uncertain about certainty. The question is, how do we start doing this with our teams? How can you go back from this conference today and start building an atmosphere locally where you get this right, where you question more, where you think differently around the issue of not being too certain about things? So that's one of them.
See, oh no, go ahead, Hal. Please, after you.
Whoa.
Oh,
Wrong.
good catch.
I mean, what's interesting is, for a decade, Clay Christensen and Jeff Darnad, and this recent project for me that I've been working on, we've been studying the top 20% leaders in the world. And these are the ones who are leading companies that are arguably sustainably innovative. They're doing it year after year, and they actually are using these skill sets that we're talking about to do it. They're the anomaly, but it's a 20% anomaly at the top of the game. And then the question just for me becomes, it's getting, for other people to do it. Do you ever have a mind blank? I've got a mind blank right now. It'll come back. Keep going.
Okay.
See,
Roger,
this is
take
great.
it away.
You're
No,
being quiet.
I admit it. I have
a little
mind blanks in my
uncomfortable.
moments. Roger,
Yeah.
go.
I
It was
do too.
going somewhere.
I do too. What I would say, Sarah, is that the logic that you gave makes lots of sense theoretically, but it does not match with my empirical experience, right? Which is the leaders who do the sort of thing that I've described here are the most loved and the most respected. Their organizations just adore them. And so I think there's a spectrum, which is wishy-washy leaders, strong-willed, singular kind of leaders, and so they're better than wishy-washy ones, but they're less good in the eyes of everybody observing them, including the capital markets, all these sort of supposed to be kind of nasty people. And so I think it's because people are taking a narrow framing and saying, is it better to be indecisive or decisive? Decisive. Is it better to be reflective and contemplative and decisive or not? It's just unquestionably the case. And
Well,
guys
that's helpful.
and guys like A.G. Lafley and Jörn Knudsstorp.
We're just having some issues with the water bottles.
Jörn Knudsstorp at Lego and Paul Pullman at I mean, who doesn't just love them? And if you watch them closely, with an uncritical eye, you'd say, oh, they kind of vacillate around and they're back and forth on things, but they lock and load at the right time, and then people will follow those people. Jim Hackett, they'll follow them to the end of the earth. So I would just say the empirics are the opposite.
Yeah.
May I add to that? Something did come back into my brain, so here we go. My add to it is those leaders and the ones that I've most been involved with, they're problem-led leaders. They're problem solvers. Ed Catmull, it's like creativity, innovation is problem solving. And they care so deeply about solving a problem, they are absolutely unafraid of any information. In fact, they're seeking it out. And one of these leaders, they said, we're truth seekers. And that's what it comes down to. How aggressive am I and willing am I to walk into a room or to be with a person that might raise information that's going to make me feel very awkward and uncomfortable, but in the end, it's in the service of a problem getting solved. And the issue is, it's not about me. That's what these leaders, that's what makes them so amazing is, it's not about me. And they come in all kinds of different flavors. You've got Ed Catmull. If you know Ed, he is the quietest person on planet Earth. And you've got Mark Benioff, on the other hand, who's one of the most loquacious, audacious, outgoing, noisy people on planet Earth. And you've got Nick Baton at ASOS, and you've got Maureen Chiquet, who used to be at Chanel, and you've got people, they are just such a wide range of individual personalities, but underneath their foundational core is they wake up in the morning with a problem they so deeply care about. They will wander and walk with intentionality into places and be with people who will so upset their models that it reframes what they've seen.
So if this is how, the most beloved leaders act, and we know that there's also not very many of them, that this is a sort of elite group of people who've managed to figure this out, what gets in the way of the rest of us, or more of us, acting more like this?
Now, unfortunately, I'm going to say that you're going to do what Thomas said. You've got 10 seconds each to answer that question, because your time is off the stage. So let's have a fast response from each speaker.
One simple advice: practice. The advice is practice. Building the ability to do this is about not reserving it only for the big problems, but also applying this to really small problems in your daily life, so you can build the muscle of starting to see things different.
One quick way to build that muscle is if you've got a challenge or problem today you're stuck on, grab 2 other people, set a timer for 4 minutes, discipline yourselves to ask nothing but questions for 4 minutes, no answers, no explanations, nothing but questions. 80% of the time, you will walk away with a reframed challenge, a new idea to potentially solve it. You'll feel better about the opportunity. You'll be going down a path. It sounds too simplistic to work, but if you do that, the conditions are you're going to be wrong, uncomfortable, and quiet. You'll get a question you didn't have before. It will cause you to go a different path.
I would say we have to transform business education on this front. Currently, the way business education teaches decision making, you will be worse at it when you finish than when you started, and we have to transform it.
Okay. Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.